Aside from buying a house, going to university is probably the biggest investment decision you'll face in your entire life. At the end of the day, going to college should be an economic decision, not an emotional decision. In this free course, freeCodeCamp founder Quincy Larson will help you decide how to plan for college. He'll explain how U.S. higher education works, how the labor market works, and he'll provide some strategies for minimizing your costs. At the end of the day, he wants to help you maximize your return on investment. Quincy recently published a free, full-length book about developer careers, and college is the #1 thing people ask him about. By the way, people also ask him a lot about ChatGPT and whether they still need to learn to code. Spoiler alert, his answer is yes. So grab your notebook or crack open your text editor because Quincy's gonna fire a lot of data at you from his decades of working in adult education. Quincy pulls no punches and has no mercy when talking about the U.S. university system, the student debt epidemic, and a student visa system that leaves so many bright people unable to get a U.S. degree. But rest assured, he has tons of practical tips that your college counselor probably never told you about. At the end of the day, Quincy wants the same thing for you that your family wants, for you to earn a good living and have a ton of career options. If you learned something from this course, be sure to send it to a friend or family member who's planning for college.
Hey, I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. And today we're going to be asking the very timely question.
Is college still worth it?
And I'm going to be arguing that in most cases, yes, it is still worth it. You're going to hear all this hype around, oh, college, who needs college anymore? I'm going to argue from numbers that college is still incredibly useful. It's still incredibly worth it. I'm also going to be talking about lots of situations where I don't think it's worth it. And I'm going to be talking about some strategies that you can use to reduce student debt, reduce the capital outlay that this giant 4-year education can represent for many people who are learning. So let's dive in.
What about return on investment?
The first thing you should consider about education is this is an economic decision. You may have aspirational reasons why you want to go to college. Maybe you're the first person in your family lineage to ever go and get a degree, and that can be a very proud moment. Maybe you have served in the armed forces and you essentially have this free way to go to university in the sense that you've got the GI Bill that's going to pay for a lot of your higher education. You still should think about things in terms of economics, and you should still think about it in terms of how much money it's going to cost and ultimately how much it's going to affect your earning potential. We're going to think about this in terms of return on investment, ROI. You may have heard that acronym before. There are other ways, of course, you can think about this. For example, if you're a big finance person, you might think in terms of net present value, which will factor in the time value of money. And that's a very real consideration as well, because money today is worth a lot more than money in the future. Not just because of inflation, but because of opportunity to invest that money. So you might, instead of going to university and spending the equivalent of $40,000 on 4 years of in-state tuition, you might want to just take that $40,000 if you have it in cash now and just put it in some sort of investment vehicle, probably like an index fund, and just let it accumulate over time. Right? That might be a rational thing to do depending on the ROI that you're looking at. Now, in order to figure out what the ROI is, we want to figure out how much money you're earning right now just with your current skills. You can probably go out and get a job as a janitor and make about $12 an hour in the United States. So if you think about $12 an hour, you multiply that times about 2,000 hours per year that you're going to be working. That's about 8 hours, or that's 40 hours a week times approximately 50 weeks, assuming you've got 2 weeks off, which may or may not be paid. I'm just going to call it $24,000 a year. So let's go ahead and let's think in terms, I'm going to show a fancy chart on the screen right now. This is approximately how much you can expect to earn with varying levels of what we'll call educational attainment. So if you went to high school, great, congratulations on graduating from high school. You're going to make more than somebody who didn't go to high school or didn't finish high school. Now getting a general equivalency diploma, GED, that's basically the same as going to high school for most, economic considerations. If you go to some college, that does technically increase your earning potential a little bit, but what really helps is not going to some college, not getting an associate's necessarily, but getting the full bachelor's degree. A bachelor's degree will roughly 2x your expected annual earnings over what you would get if you just had a high school diploma. So that is why you definitely want to consider going to college depending on how many years of productive life you have left. So let's say you're 18 to 25 would be a traditional student. So that's the age range that most people are. That's what most economists and most educators would consider to be traditional university student. That probably means that if you live to be about 80 years old, which is the life expectancy of most Americans, like women live slightly longer than men. There can be all kinds of different factors like your income bracket, family history, things like that can play into it. But we'll just call the average life expectancy of an American 80 years old. So you probably have already picked up on what I'm talking about so far, that I'm focusing mostly on the United States. That's because I grew up in the United States. I'm an American citizen. I have studied abroad. I studied in China for several years. So I have kind of a little bit of study abroad perspective, and I have worked extensively with international students who come from other countries to study in the United States. So we'll talk about that later too. But there is going to be a heavy US focus in this course. So if you're going to live to be 80 years old and you're going to work maybe 40 years after you finish, so you could basically take that 2x multiplier, and you could take the difference between earning $24,000 a year as a janitor and earning something like $44,000 as a college graduate. And by the way, your janitor income is not going to necessarily increase steadily over time. It may keep up with inflation, but don't expect to be making like 2x as a janitor just because you have a whole lot of janitorial experience. However, if you're working as a software engineer, you might be able to make 4x, 10x what you made when you first got out of college as you gradually progress through your career and accrue more experience, accrue more tacit knowledge of how the industry works, accrue more skills, accrue more responsibility. So that is what I'll say is you want to be thinking in those terms. How long you're going to be working and what the wage differential is going to be. And that will be the best way to figure out your ROI.
How does student debt work?
In the United States, the way that most people pay for their education is through some combination of working during university, some combination of their parents helping them pay for school, scholarships, and of course, student debt. And student debt is one of the most complicated factors in trying to determine ROI because you have to repay that student debt, and you're not sure whether you're going to finish university. You're not sure whether your wage after you finish university is going to be high enough for you to be able to repay that debt. And I know lots of people who have, I'm not exaggerating, more than $100,000 US worth of student debt that they have to repay. So with student debt, the best way to think of it is it's additional risk that you're incurring. Risk. So I said earlier that if you finish college, you're going to basically double your income in aggregate. Now, again, it does depend on what you're going to study, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the big thing that you need to keep in mind is student debt is going to be there whether you finish or not. You're taking a risk when you take out a student loan. If you study a field and you can't get a job afterward, that's pretty bad. Maybe you have to be what's called underemployed and you're working in hospitality despite the fact that you studied nursing or something like that. Now in practice, I think if you study nursing, you'll almost certainly be able to find a job as a nurse. But let's say hypothetically you study physics and you can't find a job as a physicist, or in order to get a job as a physicist, you have to go back to school and get a PhD. Most of the working physicists I know have PhDs. We won't get into graduate school in this course because I really want to focus on the decision to get the initial 4-year degree. But I will say that a lot of times you get into a field and there's what's called credential inflation. And what credential inflation means is basically you want to work as a librarian. Oh, it's no longer good enough to have an undergraduate degree in library science. You need to get a master's degree in library science. And that may sound absurd. Why do you need a master's degree to be a librarian? But unfortunately, that's where things are going in a lot of fields that are more competitive. So the biggest risk is not getting a job when you get out, because you have this university degree, and any sort of degree will give you an edge in the labor market. It will increase your likelihood of getting interviews and ultimately getting hired for a variety of different jobs, even those jobs that are not related to your major. The biggest risk is that for some reason you can't finish. Life gets in the way. Your parents have some sort of accident and you need to go be their caretaker, or you get pregnant, or you have some sort of illness, like you have experienced vertigo, or any number of different things that can cause you to have trouble being able to focus and being able to finish school. So if you do not finish school, the debt remains, and you still have to figure out a way to pay that off. And the worst situation you can find yourself in is where you've taken a lot of student debt out and you no longer have the ability to repay it because you're earning way below. And you might be able to go into something called forbearance, where essentially your debt is deferred to an extent, or you're paying a very small amount as opposed to the full amount that you're supposed to pay. But when you're doing that, your debt is not getting paid off, and in fact it may actually be getting larger, and at some point you're going to have to figure out a way to pay off that debt. So here is my humble advice to you. To the extent you can, completely avoid the risk of debt. Completely avoid it. If you have already taken out student debt, my humble advice would be, do whatever you can to pay it off as soon as possible, because debt can be an albatross around your neck. It can really weigh you down and prevent you from taking the kinds of career risks that might ultimately bear a whole lot of fruit when you're a little later into your career. You may have to be focusing all your time and energy working a certain job that you don't particularly like, but that pays the bills, and you don't have energy left at the end of the day to do things like learn to code, or to learn mathematics, or to build your network, or to build cool projects and put them on GitHub that you can essentially use as portfolio pieces to help you get a better job later on. So the biggest risk, debt. If you can avoid debt, avoid debt. And I'm going to give you some strategies for how to avoid getting student debt later.
What major should I study?
So there are a lot of people out there who will joke about getting a liberal arts degree. Like, oh, of course you're poor. You got a liberal arts degree. Of course you're poor. You studied drama, or you studied music, or something like that. I think that attitude is really not productive. And I know plenty of people who studied liberal arts that are working in positions of power in society. I studied liberal arts. My undergraduate degree is in liberal arts, and I'm running an NGO and have like 35 people reporting to me, right? So you could argue that those skills are not immediately useful for getting certain types of jobs, but later in life they become incredibly useful. If you look at what liberal arts people learn, they learn foreign languages, they learn argumentation and debate rhetoric, they learn how to analyze things and how to write really well and how to present themselves at a whiteboard like this. So there are a variety of different skills you'll build if you study liberal arts. But let's face it, if you study a field like computer science, you are going to be vastly better off. And I'm going to put a chart up here that will show approximately how much more money you can make as somebody, from a purely economic standpoint, how much more money you can make as a computer science major than pretty much any other major. Now, one thing you're going to note here is, petroleum engineering. Maybe I should study petroleum engineering just for fun. Here, let's put this petroleum engineering job description into Indeed.com, which is a job search engine I frequently use to show people approximately how much market demand, how many roles there are. Now, this is a very coarse measure, but it's better than nothing. And we can see that there are very few jobs for petroleum engineering. Those jobs may be higher paid, but there are fewer of them. And, I don't know why petroleum engineers are paid marginally more than computer science majors, but I don't really care that much because the amount difference is so small. Thinking about your life, the difference between making $80,000 and $100,000 is a lot less of a difference than going from making $25,000 a year to $50,000, right? Or even $45,000, right? A similar to $20,000 jump. the reality is, like, once you have a certain amount of money, every marginal dollar beyond that still feels good, but it's less vital to your survival. So I would say that, yes, you'll find reports of people who say, oh, computer science isn't the highest paid major. The reality is there are vastly more jobs for computer science majors than there are for virtually every other major you can do. And it's a very well-defined skill set, whereas studying business administration, less well-defined. If you look at the Fortune 50 CEOs in the United States as of filming, you're going to see that they have a wide variety of different majors. Many of them studied liberal arts like I did. And then the most well represented, of course, being engineers. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because what are the biggest companies in the United States? They're mostly tech companies, right? And every company is kind of trying to become a tech company. So it definitely helps to have somebody with an engineering knowledge at the helm of that company. So I would strongly recommend studying computer science. I would recommend it above other STEM fields. And here's why. I have lots of friends who studied physics. I have lots of friends who studied chemistry. I have lots of friends who studied life science. And most of them have kind of seen the writing on the wall that the actual high-paying jobs are working with software, and they've had to go and learn to code after school. Maybe they did some coding. I mean, like, if you study any STEM field, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, you are probably going to take some programming classes. But when you graduate and you look at the job market, you're going to say, wow, I really need to learn more programming. You're going to end up on freeCodeCamp.org. Welcome. We love having people who have science backgrounds further refine their programming skills, and we're happy to help with that. But you may be able to take more programming, more mathematics, more things that are relevant to the actual developer jobs that are out there, that are generally the best jobs in the country, in my opinion, that are going to give you a good combination of flexibility, being able to work remotely, career trajectory. You can go all the way up to CEO as a software engineer, whereas, like, if you study certain fields, there may be some sort of like area where you cap out and you have to go get an MBA or something to continue to proceed. And of course, compensation. Software engineers they make more money than basically anybody, including people who essentially go to school to learn how to make money. People who study finance, business administration, things like that, right? So that tells you a lot about the value of computer science. Another quick note, there are degrees in fields like computer engineering, IT, and another one is software engineering. Now, you would actually think software engineering would be the best major in terms of being prepared to work in software engineering. I can't tell you exactly why, because I'm not sure exactly why, but most hiring managers, most HR people are proactively looking for people who have computer science degrees, and having a degree in software engineering, while it might actually help you do the job better, it may make it slightly harder for you to find that job. So when in doubt, just go with a computer science degree.
What if I'm older?
So if you are older, again, it comes back into the question of ROI. How many years do you think you're going to be working? I would say that don't underestimate yourself. I'm 42. I feel high energy. Granted, I don't have any like genetic issues. I'm not on insulin. I don't have a lot of things that may be plaguing people as they get into their 40s. But I do believe that I can probably work another 20 or 30 years productively. So retirement age in the United States, I believe, is 67. So just subtract your age from 67, and that's a rough rubric for how many years you're going to have left. Now, if you take that multiplier, double your income, and then you subtract out the cost of a college education, again, if you go to in-state tuition at a 4-year institution, it's going to be about $10,000 a year in tuition. That doesn't include fees, and when you go to a big state university, you're kind of also paying for them to maintain the lawn on the stadium, and to maintain the random buildings that provide air conditioning and water to all the physical plant. There are lots of fees, student activity fees, library fees, things like that. So factor those in, and then of course the big thing is cost of living. And the thing you need to factor in is okay, I'm going to be spending approximately 28 hours per week if I'm a full-time student. That's about how much time a full-time student spends studying in the United States, according to studies that I've read. You might think, oh, well, I thought students would it'd be more like 40 hours. No, it turns out that school is not nearly as hard as everybody pretends it is, and 28 hours is about how much people spend studying and going to class, taking exams, all those different things. Now, that may vary from major to major. Like if you're studying, medicine, for example, it may be way more intense than that. But if you're working, let's say 28 hours a week on your studies, that's 28 hours of time and energy that you don't have to devote to a job that can help you earn income. So let's say that you're working at a grocery store as a manager, and you're working there, you're making $30,000 a year. And that job takes 40 hours out of your week. So you could basically have to bolt on an extra 28 hours per week worth of work if you're full-time, or if you're doing part-time school, it might only be like half that, 14 hours additional study. And it would take you twice as many years to finish the program, but it may be much more sustainable. So to answer the question of should you go back to school if you're older, it ultimately comes down to ROI, and it comes down to your own personal feelings about how much longer you think you're going to be able to work, and whether you think you could balance going to school with your current obligations, both familial and work.
What if I'm outside the U.S.?
So, of course, I'm very blessed to have been born in the United States. I'm a native English speaker. I've got a U.S. passport. And there are only about 4% of the world population also shares that privilege. If you were born in China, India, Nigeria, one of many other countries that receive many of the 1 million international students that are studying in the United States, these are people that have generally finished high school in their country and then gotten into they've gotten into a university here in the U.S. They've cleared the very lengthy visa process. Maybe their family has saved up for a generation to be able to afford for them to be able to go to the United States and study. If you're one of those people, it can be very tricky. And I'm not going to give like super granular advice for that, but I will say that there may be some alternatives that don't involve going through the visa process, where you can still graduate from a U.S. university without having to spend a huge amount of money. Now, we're talking about $40,000 US per year to attend a state school with out-of-state tuition. So by virtue of being outside of the country, you are out of state. And in fact, some schools may charge even higher tuition for international students than they would charge for like another US resident who is just like from a different state. Like let's say I grew up in Oklahoma. If I had studied in Texas, even though it's very close geographically, I would have to pay out-of-state tuition, which is 3 times as much, right? Which really incentivizes you to go to school in your state. So as an international student, you face a whole lot of additional considerations around cost. Later, I'm going to talk about some alternatives that can allow you to get an American education without spending American international student prices.
Does it matter which type of university I go to?
So it does matter quite a bit which type of university you go to, and I'll tell you which one you should go to in a minute. But let me first lay out the 3 big categories. So first there's public, and that could be both community college and universities. That could be like a state university system. It could be just like the research university systems. For example, in California, you have California State University, and you also have University of California system. Then there's private, and that's nonprofit, private nonprofit. So this is usually private schools, small liberal arts colleges. It can also be like all the Ivy League schools are private. Most private universities in the United States are owned by churches, for example. And then, so they may have some, required theology-related credits for the undergrad. And then there's what's called private for-profit. So this would be the kinds of universities you see on late-night TV, basically running commercials. There have been so many of these that have been shut down recently because, frankly, you should just assume that these are scams until proven otherwise, in my opinion. And I know there are probably lots of people out there who are watching this who work at a private for-profit. And if you're one of the good ones, fantastic. But I really believe that these are the only considerations you should make. And it may be harder to get into these institutions. There may be more paperwork. There may be less guidance from a counselor/salesperson who's trying to get you in. But it is absolutely best to go to one of these. Now, you generally want to go to a community college first. The reason is twofold. One, community colleges are a lot cheaper. They are a lot cheaper. They're designed for people who don't necessarily have a whole lot, like a giant scholarship for playing sports or for academic reasons. They're also designed with local, like people who don't want to commute really far. They want to continue living with their parents or living with a roommate in the area where they have their job, or if they've already have kids, not having to uproot or spend a huge amount of time on the road, basically. And a lot of times the instruction you get at a community college is actually better than what you'll get at a 4-year research institution. And the reason is everybody at community colleges is focused on teaching. They're focused on actually helping the students learn, and they're less focused on trying to get their H number and get more citations in academia. The other thing that I'll say about community colleges, in addition to being cheaper and having potentially better pedagogy, is that you can use your completion of a community college to transfer into a school that otherwise might be very selective and difficult to get into. For example, I talk to people all the time who go to a community college and then are able to transition, like from, for example, in University of Texas, pretty difficult to get into University of Texas. They probably turn away a lot of people. But if you go to a community college in Texas, it's almost like you're guaranteed to be able to transition in. Now, this depends from community college to community college. I would definitely research this beforehand. But if you plan to go to a more selective state university, and when I say state, I mean the same as public, a state university, then community college can make a lot of sense. So you finish 2 years at community college, you transfer in to a 4-year university, and you earn your bachelor's degree. You already kind of have an associate's degree, which you can get through community colleges. And some community colleges may even offer bachelor's degrees. If you want to stay at a community college the entire time and get a bachelor's degree there, I don't think there's any harm. It should be good return on investment. Now, the second one is private nonprofit. These are all your Ivy Leagues, MIT, Caltech, a whole lot of the best universities in America are private. And that kind of makes sense in the sense that like they usually have really high tuition, so they're able to pay their professors a lot more. Maybe they have a lot more money to plow into having fancier campuses, things like that. They probably have a lot more money for activities and things like that. These institutions are often much older. As I said, they're often owned by churches. The oldest, if you want to know what the most prestigious universities in the United States are, just stack rank them by their age. Harvard is the oldest university in the United States, and it also happens to be generally regarded as the best. Yale, Princeton, Columbia, the other Ivy League schools are also very old schools. In fact, you'd have to go pretty far down the list before you got to a prestigious institution that was founded within the last 100 years, right? So you can absolutely go to these private nonprofit universities, but they are expensive. They're dramatically more expensive than paying in-state tuition. You might be spending something like $40,000. You might be spending something like $60,000 a year just in tuition and fees to be able to attend these universities. So the ROI, you would think, oh, well, these private nonprofits probably have lower ROI than just attending a good public university. And that is true in a lot of cases, depending on what you major in. You can go to Princeton and study liberal arts and get out and maybe make a lot less money than somebody who studied computer science at a public university and spent a small fraction of what you spent on your degree. But one thing I will tell you about these institutions is the actual major you study is much more important than where you study. Granted that if you just have a generic degree in anything from Harvard, that's probably better than having like an engineering degree from a small state school that nobody's heard of in terms of immediate earning potential coming out of college. But that is very quickly, like that difference is very quickly eroded in the marketplace. If you continue to progress as a software engineer, you can quickly outpace and out-earn somebody who has an undergraduate degree from Columbia in film or something like that, right? So don't worry about which school you study at. I would just optimize for ROI. Unless you're getting a large scholarship or you have some sort of like your parents went to the school and you can get like a favorable deal going there, I would definitely prioritize going to public schools, and I would definitely prioritize leveraging the community college to public university pipeline.
So what's the optimal path through university?
If you want to further reduce the cost of college education, if you're in high school, I recommend taking AP credits. You may hear AP Physics, AP Computer Science, AP History. These can all potentially be turned into free college credit when you go into the university. You can essentially come into university with like up to a year's worth of college already done. Imagine going to college and instead of having to study for 4 years, you come in as a sophomore and you only have 3 years of study. You can potentially do that with AP. Advanced placement. That's a system we have here in the United States. And you can take those courses and take those exams here in the United States as a high school student. And even after high school, you might be able to take some of those. But there's another thing that's very powerful that not as many people know about, and that is CLEP. CLEP, I don't remember what it stands for. I'm not going to look it up. It doesn't matter. Everybody just calls it CLEP. And what it is, you CLEP out of courses. You take an exam, you can read books, you can do whatever you want. If you already have some knowledge of a subject just from being casually interested in it, you may be able to pay $120, take the CLEP exam, and then you don't have to take that course in university. So a lot of what we call Gen Ed, general education credits, like history, like philosophy, like physics, you may have to take these courses depending on which university you study at. But if you CLEP out of those courses, you may not have to take them at all. You can save a ton of money. And you can also save a lot of time, because it may turn out that like sitting there like with a professor who's distracted with their, research and doesn't even really care about teaching. It may be like not every college course is amazing. That's one thing I'll tell you about college is you may be shocked at how low quality the product is for what you're paying for. I had a friend who was studying at NYU and she was paying $7,000 per course. If you're paying $7,000, those courses better be pretty damn good. If it's really just like one semester's worth of sitting among a whole bunch of other people in an auditorium learning from the professor, right? And frankly, not all of them are. And in a lot of cases, it is good to CLEP out of courses. So there are what I like to call ultra low cost, low cost use. These are universities that are so much cheaper that it's like almost unfathomably cheap. And there are two that I really want to talk about, which is University of the People, and then there's Western Governors University. Now, I should add, we do not have any sort of affiliate relationships with these institutions. Nobody from them is telling me like, oh, please, Quincy, create a video where you pitch our universities. I'm just saying in terms of sheer ROI, these are a slam dunk, especially if you're going to be if you're not going to be able to attend a campus, if you're a non-traditional student, meaning you're like older than 25, you're going back to get your degree, you're probably going to be doing what we call night school, working at essentially remotely learning. So in those cases, it 100% makes sense to consider University of the People or Western Governors University. In fact, I have lots of friends who've attended both of these universities. So I can personally vouch that, it's a degree. Now, let me tell you how these work. So they both work different ways. University of the People, you just pay an assessment fee for each course. It's technically tuition free. And so you'll pay, I think, $120 to take the exam at the end of each course. And there's 40 courses. So you multiply 40 courses times 120. We can do that right here. 40 times 120, you get $4,800. Imagine getting a degree from an accredited 4-year university for less than $5,000. That sounds too good to be true, but it's true. It's real. I have lots of friends who've done it. Western Governors University uses a slightly different system where you can basically take as many courses as you want per semester. And I think it's less than $10,000 to do an entire year there. And if you work really aggressively, you can potentially complete an entire degree in like a year, 18 months. So you could be spending, $15,000, $10,000 and get a full accredited 4-year degree.
How does accreditation work?
Accreditation is essentially how universities police one another to make sure that they're not cutting corners. And it is kind of a peer review system. You'll have professors from one university go and visit another university and bless that program. So there are several different kinds of accreditation. There's what's called regional. There's what's called national. And then there's what's called programmatic. So the way that the most prestigious is regional. And that may sound like, well, that's weird. Why would regional be more, heavy in value than national? But it's much harder to get regional. So there's this organization called CHEA, CHEA, the Council of Higher Education Accreditation. I think assessment or something like that. I can't remember the exact acronym. But this is the organization that blesses universities. And if you can get this accreditation, it's worth its weight in gold. Essentially, it's like everybody will take your university seriously, and you don't need to worry about being called a quote-unquote diploma mill. Now, people throw that term diploma mill around all the time, and I just want to give credit to the universities. Like, a diploma mill, I consider that to be basically some place where you mail in and you get a fake PhD, right? And you don't actually do any coursework. There are plenty of programs like that that are super sketchy. Never associate yourself with any of those. If you are found to have like a fake degree of any kind, it's career suicide, essentially. Don't do that. But there are also organizations that don't quite rise to that level of rigor, but are totally legit national accreditation. So this is like a lot of the private for-profit universities get national accreditation is a little bit easier. And for example, both of those universities I talked to about earlier, University of the People, Western Governors University, they get national accreditation. And this includes something like it's called DEAC accreditation. This is like regional, Distance Education Accreditation Commission, I believe. So you might be able to get DEAC accreditation, which is a form of national accreditation. And if you get that, then you're basically a remote school that can be online. It's very, very common. I think both University of the People and Western Governors University started off with that accreditation and then moved to national accreditation or regional accreditation over time. There's a third type of accreditation called programmatic accreditation. Programmatic is if you're a nursing school, you're a law school, you're a medical school, you're doing a specific program and you just want that specific program accredited. Now, business schools, there are like certain types of accreditation that are more prestigious than business schools. You can check. This is a good measure to make sure you're not getting ripped off as a student. But the one thing I want you to keep in mind is you can be like a total terrible university and still technically be accredited. It's very hard to lose your accreditation. It rarely happens. So a university might be good at one point, get accredited, and then may have a succession of leadership that kind of like strips the university for parts or cuts lots of corners. And it could take decades for that university to lose its accreditation, despite the fact that they've essentially been asleep at the wheel in terms of running that university. So do not look to accreditation as the sole arbiter of whether a university is good. What I recommend is reach out to the alumni. Hang out at an alumni function. If people are like, man, I'm so glad I studied at this school. Like, I've had this amazing career, and if people are like donating tons of money to the school, that's like a really good indication that it is a good school. So even though you understand now that I've given you this mini lecture on accreditation, just don't take it as, it has some face value, but don't make accreditation be your shortcut to deciding, oh, the school's cool. Investigate. your education may very well be the second largest investment in your life, presuming that you are able to afford enough money to buy a home here in the United States, which is probably going to be bigger than your education unless you go to a really expensive school. So just treat this as it's the second biggest investment in your life. One other thing I'll say is, aside from transferring between community colleges and four-year institutions, it's very hard to transfer credit. You don't want to make the wrong decision, go to a bad university, and have to switch. A lot of the money you've spent will just basically be gone. You might be able to transfer in like a few classes, but you're probably going to have to retake a lot of those. So you definitely want to do your research and pick the right school first. And don't just pick the school that's like really close down the road, even if it's like a private for-profit or a private nonprofit that charges an arm and a leg. Really drill into those outcomes and make sure that you're making a good decision as far as ROI. Again, above all else, if you're trying to get your money's worth, consider the return on investment.
What are some traps people fall into?
So there are several traps that people fall into. One I will call the passion trap. Passion. So you really like taking photos. You really want to go to school for photography and become a professional photographer. That is totally chill. I encourage you to pursue that passion, but I would not encourage you to attend a private for-profit photography school, for example, or even a private nonprofit photography school. In fact, I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to pursue photography as a major at all. I would encourage you to continue to study, looking at professional photographers, studying their work, studying other things, because if you get a major in photography, it doesn't really matter for most gigs that you're going to be working as a photographer. It's not like the person's going to be like, oh, where did you study? They're going to be like, show me your portfolio, show me your work, or who recommended you, those kinds of things. There are certain fields where a college degree doesn't really matter unless you're trying to become a professor in that field. And I will tell you that academia is very dysfunctional. We call it the academic pyramid scheme. For every PhD, or for every tenure track, we'll just call this tenure, in the US, there are 50x PhDs trying to get up there, right? Trying to climb the pyramid to get to the top. It's very difficult to get this coveted tenure track position at a university. So academia, don't play that game. Like, unless you're really confident or you're just studying a field where you're going to want to get a PhD anyway, like physics, I would not continue to study. I think so many people spend years studying their PhD before they realize, man, I really don't like this, and they churn out a PhD program. So anyway, I know this isn't about PhD programs, but I'll just take this moment to tell you that academia is kind of a pyramid scheme, and everybody kind of knows it, and they play the game anyway because it's like playing the lottery. If you get that tenure track position, if you're able to live that life of mind and be a professor and do cool, interesting research, you're going to meet lots of professors who are like, oh, of course, like it's worth it. I had a great time. It's not that big. It's not a pyramid scheme, but keep in mind that for every person who entered into a PhD program, hopefully trying to become an academic, there are 49 other people who did not make it, right? So just keep that in mind. So that's trap number one. Trap number two would be micromanaging. So you're going to look at US News and World Report and you're going to see all of these data everywhere. Oh my goodness, there's so much data. Like, I'm going to be the most informed, I'm going to make the most educated decision anybody's ever made about where to study. And I will tell you, none of that stuff really matters that much. Those data are probably spurious at best because they're not taking into account a whole lot of different things like the socioeconomic background of the people who studied at that school. Of course, people at Ivy League schools generally have better outcomes because their parents are probably rich, and the best predictor of your own success is how successful your parents were. You know, don't hate the player, hate the game, as I like to say. Like, I'm not trying to pick on specific universities, but I'm just saying, of course, if you drill into the information, and I think this is a neurosis, you've got, in countries like India and China, you've got people that are studying extremely hard to try to get into this coveted, like, top tier of universities thinking that's the only path forward. Like, I've got to get into Harvard. I've got to get into MIT. But I'm here to tell you, if you study at a good state school and you study hard and you go out and you get a good job and you continue to progress through your field, you can be in as good or better position than those people that work so hard to get into these extremely selective institutions. So that would be what I call the micromanagement trap. Don't think that just because the data say, oh, you should go to Harvard, never get that kind of Harvard or bust mentality. Look at other options. So I think that this kind of breaks down when you're looking at good public institutions, because they are much more reasonably priced. You're much more likely to have a higher ROI. So the third trap is, I see people think like, I don't care about money, right? Like, I was like this. I worked at Taco Bell, I worked construction, I worked at grocery stores, I worked at convenience stores. I just did odd jobs and I read books and I just hung out, and I was totally cool with that. And I didn't care about university because I didn't care about money. Like, so many of the best things in life were completely free. Hanging out with your friends, reading books, going for a walk in the park. And it can be very easy to think like, oh, minimum wage is fine. I'll just make do. I can sleep on a mattress on the floor, and I can have my bookshelf made out of concrete blocks, and it's totally chill. I'm here to tell you that that is a totally viable strategy to get you through your 20s, maybe even your 30s. But if you have a kid, if you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, if you find out that your parents are, have cancer, any number of different things that can come up, the U.S. healthcare system is not going to save you. U.S. welfare system is practically non-existent. You are going to be screwed really badly if you don't plan ahead. And the best way to plan ahead is to make money, even if you're living well below your means. And I can tell you, I know lots of people who make lots of money as software engineers who do not drive Ferraris and do not have, Park Avenue apartments. They are living well within their means, and they're just taking that money and they're putting it into an index fund, and they're just letting compound interest, the most powerful force in the universe, according to Albert Einstein, compound interest. Put some money into the stock market in a sensible way. Again, I just recommend index funds because there's no management cost really. It's like negligible. It's like 4 or 5 basis points. And just let that money sit there and let it do dollar cost averaging if you want, where every day it takes out like a certain amount of money so you don't have to think about it, and just earn that money. And then if you ever need it, you have a whole lot of money there. Why not? There's never a situation where having a lot of money is worse than not having money, right? It's an absolute advantage in terms of the curveballs that life can throw your way. So I just want to emphasize that even if you don't care about money, it is a rational thing to go to college and try to maximize your earning power, so that if you don't care about money, you can push a broom as a janitor, which I did, push a mop around, clean up the grocery store, or you could be just doing some knowledge worker job that pays twice as much, that isn't significantly more exerting mentally or physically, and just accruing money that you'll have in case you need it. So I genuinely believe that, like, take this I don't care about money thing. I know it can sound cool, like to just be aloof and not care and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it is a very good thing to have money. I'm not saying you need to become, a 100 millionaire or anything like that. I'm just saying to become middle class and to save money and to reduce your risk later in life. And it would be very cool to retire at some point, right? You may not think like, oh, I love working, I don't think I'll ever need to retire, but you may very well change your mind when you're getting older, or you get diagnosed with repetitive stress syndrome, or you're having insomnia because your sleep's broken down over the years, or you're experiencing vertigo, or any number of different things that can just suddenly come out of nowhere and start making it much harder to work. So these would be, I think, my 3 traps. Just to recap: studying what you're passionate about as opposed to studying something that has a higher ROI. As I've established, computer science has the highest ROI. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Micromanaging your studies and focusing too much on data and not seeing the forest for the trees, and not thinking that college is important and not planning for the future. I think as long as you avoid these 3 traps, you're going to find yourself in a much better situation, and you're going to incur a lot less risk, and you're probably going to incur a lot less debt. Don't a lot of entrepreneurs drop out? So a lot of entrepreneurs drop out of college, but not a lot of entrepreneurs succeed. Of course, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. You can probably think of lots of famous people who've dropped out of school and then gone on to become billionaires. And the thing to note about that is they are outliers. Just by virtue of their extreme success, they're already outliers. But in practice, like we looked at I'll show it again, the Fortune 500 CEOs. I think virtually every one of these CEOs has a degree. There are sometimes companies that are founded by people who drop out of college, but it's much less common. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, there's a trope. You can get a job without a degree, right? Like Google, Apple, all these companies coming out and saying, you don't need a degree. You don't need a degree to work here anymore. But I challenge you to walk around the Googleplex or the Apple campus and ask people like, hey, do you have a degree? Do you have a degree? You might walk around all day without finding somebody who doesn't have a degree. Yes, technically you can get a job at Apple if you don't have a degree. You can get a job at Google if you don't have a degree, but you probably need to be some open source superstar, or you need to have like 10 years of sysadmin experience. There are so many ways that you can get good enough at software development that you could work at a big tech company without a degree. But it's rare that somebody just gets hired straight out of high school into such a role, because getting a degree, first of all, it shows that you have the fortitude to actually finish the degree, which is not easy. And two, it shows that you think long-term and that you've made that investment in yourself. And three, it's just like a general way of de-risking people. And almost every one of these companies, regardless of what they say publicly, they're going to have an HR department and they're going to list, maybe they don't put the university degree requirement in their job posting, but I guarantee you that the HR people that use filtering software, that's going to be one of the factors that they look at when they determine which resumes to review and which people to interview. It's probably going to be weighted. Maybe the degree is only worth like 3 or 4 points out of like 20 points that they would consider, but it is, a consideration. And I will tell you, like freeCodeCamp, I think we have probably at least 5 or 6 people on our team of 35 people who do not have a university degree. But we also have several people who have PhDs, right? So it depends so much on the individual. There are so many considerations, but freeCodeCamp is one of the most adventurous institutions in terms of hiring people who don't have university degrees for coveted remote knowledge worker jobs. In practice, most companies are going to be much more careful about that. So if you drop out because your company is getting millions of dollars in seed funding, or you've gotten a whole bunch of clients and you don't feel like you need to go to school anymore, that is totally legitimate. I can totally see why, if your career is taking off and college is a distraction, you can drop out. And in fact, some institutions like Stanford have like a rule that like you can basically come back anytime you want and just pick back up your studies. Other institutions, if you're gone for a certain number of years, your credits kind of expire and you have to start at the beginning, right? So you'll want to look at those considerations, but really, unless you're getting some sort of crazy product market fit, some sort of crazy traction with your startup, or unless some really rich person offered you a job to like be their kind of personal assistant or to build some product for them or something like that, I would not leave college for that. Now, again, if you study at Stanford, or if you study at a university that's more permissive and porous as far as coming in and out, you could take a gap year. That's totally fine. But I would recommend at some point going back and completing your degree, even if that's just to go and complete a degree at University of the People or Western Governors University. So as you can tell, I'm very much in the college degree is important camp. You're not going to see me trashing college degree or running Google ads that say like, hey, you don't need a degree, just go to freeCodeCamp. I don't believe that at all. I believe very much in the benefit of a college education. I myself have a college education. I even went to grad school. Most of my friends went to college. Whenever you hear some wealthy person say, oh, you don't need to go to college anymore, just ask yourself, does that person have a college degree? Like, can they really say that objectively? Because a lot of times people forget all the things that they learned in college that did help them, or they don't see the invisible benefit of just having HR people not filter you out because you don't have a degree and getting so many more job interviews and things like that. So I believe so strongly that everybody should get a degree. And I believe that most people who are going to school today should probably get a degree in computer science because it's so flexible. It's the Swiss Army knife of tech degrees.
What about freeCodeCamp's degree program?
I'm very hardened at the ultra low cost universities that I was talking about earlier, University of the People, Western Governors University, and how they've dramatically reduced the cost of being able to get an accredited U.S. university degree. I don't think that they've done enough. I think education wants to be free. It wants for everybody to be able to benefit from it. And if you really want to make something that everybody can benefit from, you need to make it free. Think about the 60% of people on Earth who live off less than $10 a day. Think about all the people who are outside the United States who are not likely to be able to save up enough money to come to the U.S., who are not likely to be able to get a U.S. visa, who are living in a rural village in India, who are doing subsistence farming in a rural Chinese town, or living in a favela in Brazil. Those people, those families, they're not going to be able to send their kids to learn in the United States. But you know what they might be able to do? They might be able to do free code camp. So we're developing a 40-course undergraduate degree. So it's an associate's degree in mathematics and a bachelor's degree in computer science. And it will take you through everything you need. There are no electives. There are no prerequisites. You just start at the top and you progress through these 40 university courses. And it's going to be a whole lot of coursework. It's going to take several years for most people if they're learning part-time, but they'll be able to do it at their own pace for free. They'll be able to work through all the labs. They'll be able to take all the final exams, and they'll be able to get a degree from a university that will eventually be accredited. It will take until the early 2030s to finish developing all of these courses. We've already published one of them, and we're going to be publishing a lot more soon. And then after we publish the entire degree, people have gone through the program, gotten the degree. It'll still take some time for us to have enough longitudinal data to be able to get accredited by one of the big national accreditation agencies. But that is what we've committed to, and we're making steady progress toward it. I think it's absolutely vital that we teach the correct current skills. So you're going to see not only that we teach 8 courses of engineering math, which I think mathematics is incredibly important, especially if you want to get into like machine learning. We also want to teach security. We want to teach ethics. We want to teach a whole lot of general ed credit that a university would traditionally have, epistemology, topics like that. And we want to teach it in a way that you can progress, get an associate degree halfway through, and then you can progress if you'd like and get the full bachelor's degree at the end. Our thinking is we want the most middle-of-the-road conventional university degree we can. We've looked at the top 20 computer science degree programs in the United States. MIT, Caltech, Harvey Mudd, Stanford. We've looked at how their universities are configured in terms of the courses that people take as part of their degree programs. And we've essentially made a composite degree that hits all those highlights, and it's the most middle-of-the-road computer science degree you can imagine if you're just looking at top universities that are likely to turn out graduates who are likely to work in industry at big tech or potentially get jobs at banks, hospitals, lots of developer jobs. About 2/3 of software developer jobs are not in big tech. They're in other ancillary industries. And also, of course, many of those people that study those computer science programs go on to found startups, to get venture capital funding, or to be able to bootstrap to success. And so we're going to be focused on just giving people the skills that they'll have the optionality to work freelance, to work in big tech, to work at a smaller regional company, or to potentially build a startup.
What determines job compensation?
Right. So compensation, how much money you're making for your time, and that's a way to think of getting compensated, is essentially you're selling your time to an employer and they're paying you for that time. It's a buying and selling process, right? So of course, first is just labor market economics. You have your supply you have your demand, and then you have your price here in the middle, right? So it depends a lot on what the market is like in terms of the overall economy and things like that. If there are a lot more people that are looking for jobs than there are jobs available, employers can afford to pay less and things like that. So just keep in mind, like economics, right? That's one. Two, skills. So one of the reasons that doctors get paid so much money in the United States is because it takes a lot of work to become a doctor. After you finish high school, you've got to go to college. Then you have to get into medical school. That's another 4 years. Then after you finish medical school, you have to do 3 to 5 years of residency where you work with other physicians and basically are supervised. And then you can become like fully cool to go start your own practice or work for a big hospital chain or whatever you want to do as an independent physician. So if you think about that, that's so much additional. It's like 12 extra years of education that you need to get before you can do it to build up those skills. So naturally, you're going to want to be compensated more. And so physicians tend to be compensated more. Software engineering, same way. You have to study computer science and you have to like build up your skills and prove your skills. But if the difference between like a developer who just got out and maybe is making like $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 as a software engineer, and an engineer that's working on like recommendation algorithms at Google, they could just be an engineer without any charges. People who are working under them, they could be an individual contributor, and they could be making $1 million a year in compensation as a software engineer, right? And it comes down to skills and their ability. 3, working conditions. So let's think about working in what would traditionally be called a sweatshop. Like you might be in circumstances that are literally illegal, doing piecework, having a boss who's lording over you, having dangerous machines that you're like a loom or sewing machine or something like that you can get hurt on, right? To some extent, by getting better working conditions, being able to work in an air-conditioned office or being able to work at home as a remote worker, like those are kind of forms of compensation, and often that like your compensation will be slightly lower if you have like a posh situation where you can be sitting down all day, for example. And then 4, of course, danger. So the most dangerous jobs in the United States are working as a lumberjack, working on cell phone towers, where you could potentially fall to your death if there's a mistake. There are so many different jobs that you get compensated because they know that you could physically get injured or killed doing the job. Being a trucker is a very dangerous job, and it's very demanding physically to be sitting there all day. I mean, it's wearing out your back. You may have to have a lot of sleepless nights to deliver your load on time. So those 4 things all determine compensation to an extent. But the one thing that you had the most control over, you can't really control this at all. Working conditions, you just need a certain floor for your working conditions and you're probably good. Some people might be willing to work in more hostile conditions, like let's say going and working in a war zone or something like that to increase your compensation. Again, that also kind of feeds into danger a little bit, but really, what can you control? You can control your skills, and that's probably the most rational thing to optimize, is trying to get as high skilled as possible. And that's why I would encourage people to learn software engineering and programming, because it's a very remunerative skill set to have. So first, I want to say thank you for hearing me out, for listening to my opinions on a lot of these different things. I hope they're relevant to you. I want to encourage you to continue developing skills. You don't have to go to university to learn these skills. You certainly don't have to go back to university and get a master's degree. And we didn't really even talk about master's degrees. I do have a master's degree. I have an MBA. I have a lot of friends who have master's degrees. In general, I'll pull up the chart again. In general, you do make more compensation for getting a master's degree. But if you look at the difference between having a bachelor's degree, having a master's degree, and having a bachelor's degree and no degree, it's dramatic. Like you double your income for getting a master's degree, and you maybe like get an extra 10, 15% of income if you get a master's degree. Depending on what you get the master's degree in, you may be able to get somebody to pay to send you back to get a master's degree later in life. Like your employer might do that as a perk and say, oh, we'll pay for you to get an MBA, or we'll pay for you to get a master's in computer science. If you can do that, go for it. I think it's great if you're not having to pay for it. But I don't think the ROI is necessarily there. So I would encourage you to continue to learn your skills through freeCodeCamp. One question that we didn't get into is, if you already have a university degree, should you go back and get a second undergraduate degree? And I would say in like 99% of cases, that's not worth it. Just learn to code on your own, self-teach. There are literally millions of people who are self-teaching. There are tens of thousands of people that I know of who I've directly confirmed have gotten their first software development job after finishing freeCodeCamp. And many of those people did not have a degree. Also, I'll tell you that if you listen to the freeCodeCamp podcast, which I host each week, just go in your podcast player of choice and search freeCodeCamp, and you'll find my podcast. I talk to a lot of people who don't have university degrees who are doing just fine as software engineers. So everything I've said here, there are always exceptions. I think in terms of maximizing your likelihood of being able to earn a living, to provide for your family, to have a clear forward and upward career trajectory, getting an undergraduate degree is the correct thing to do. I think getting it as inexpensively as you can, doing in-state tuition, doing community college, CLEPing and AP crediting out of certain courses, or doing an ultra low cost for your university. I think anything you can do to reduce your cost is by definition going to increase your ROI, and any money you can save today and invest is going to compound over time. So really, in my opinion, I just recommend going to the cheapest state school you can go to that's reasonably good, and I strongly recommend studying computer science over other majors, just because, as I said, it's the Swiss Army knife of undergraduate university degrees. So with that, I hope this course has been helpful for you. I hope you've learned a lot. If you're not familiar with the freeCodeCamp channel, we've got tons of amazing courses, like more than 1,000 courses on very specific technologies. They're not usually some dude standing at a whiteboard talking a whole lot. Usually they're interactive coding sessions, but I think you'll find them to be very helpful. Just remember that you don't have to pay a penny to learn to code. You don't need to have a credit card. You don't need to get a visa to come to the US to work at these hallowed halls of these big tech companies or anything like that. You don't need to go to a 400-year-old university to be educated, right? You can educate yourself. You can learn whatever you need going to freeCodeCamp and using other free learning resources, using other videos here on YouTube. There are so many amazing teachers here that will teach you everything you need to know. You just have to be curious, and you just have to put in the time and the energy to learn. With that, happy coding.